Chapter 14. One must first scale the mountain in order to view the plain. Lou did not return at the end of a few days. Weeks passed before he acquired strength and courage to take up once more normal tasks of living. In his absence, the journeyman shared his labor. Young Fu was confined for longer hours to the anvil and furnace room. This was the branch of the work he liked least. To design a new pattern answered some deep-seated need of his being. To do important errands and bargain with customers exercised his wits. This business of welding and cutting was work any artisan can do. He justified himself even while he admitted the truth of Lou's former remarks concerning his inaptitude for these lines. Here was where his friend Li shone. Li's seams were always beautifully joined, and he enjoyed making them so. Tang said Li was developing into the kind of journeyman any brass shop might desire. This experience is excellent for your training, Tang told Young Fu one morning during Lou's continued absence. We shall make a good workman of you yet. You are beginning to mold kettles less like those of a water buffalo might be expected to turn out. The listeners laughed, but Young Fu, sweating over the work he loathed, did not smile. For the rest of the forenoon, his face held to its sullen expression. Old Su ventured an ironical remark and received a scowl in return. Later in the day, Tang called the youth aside. You disappoint me, he began flatly. You have, I fear, been spoiled by too much good fortune. This is, after all, a brass shop, not a place to rear the pampered sons of the wealthy. Each part of the work is as important as another. Were it not for men who turn naturally to the furnace and anvil, we should have no need for the store, or, he paused for emphasis, for designers. Young Fu winced under Tang's level gaze. Without a word in reply, he turned and resumed his work. He was hot with fury. He worked hard. He was not a pampered son of the wealthy, nor had he been spoiled by too much good fortune. He caught up his hammer. How he would like to beat the jar in which he was working out of recognition. His hands were shaking. With difficulty, he steadied himself. As he labored, he took a new interest in the article. He would let Tang see that he could make as good seams as any man in his place. He would let Tang see. During the hours that remained, he took painstaking care with the jar. He would leave this anvil for nothing, if he could avoid it. Fragments of Tang's speech recurred constantly. Disappointed in him. That was unfortunate, but Tang could recover without his assistance. This coppersmith was not the only man in the Middle Kingdom, or, for that matter, in Chungking. Then why, his mind asked him, did he let the other's words annoy him so greatly? He shook the thought from him. Tang gave him a cool nod as Young Fu said, Good night. Sore of heart, the youth passed into the street. At home he was restless. If he were still at Dai's, his feet would inevitably have sought Wang Scholar. Perhaps it was better that Wang Scholar was not so close. This was a matter that concerned him and the coppersmith alone. Bed was no comfort. Within him was no desire to meet Tang, but the place drew him like a magnet. A new piece lay before him. On it he concentrated all of his attention. When he finished with it, he was conscious of satisfaction. He defied anyone to say this was not good workmanship. He looked long at the object and realized wearily that he cared little what anyone thought about it. Only one thing mattered. Tang was disappointed in him, and rightly so. Instead of trying to do his part of the work well, he had shirked whenever possible. For a youth of his age, he had been given rare privileges about the establishment, and it had been due, not to his own remarkable ability, but to the fact that Tang, from the first, had been kindly disposed toward him. In the classics, the sages taught that ingratitude was one of the worst of all evils. His memory flashed to Den. How differently that one had tried to repay the man who had shown him such questionable friendliness. And Tang had advanced him whenever possible. Tang had given him the maximum in wages. Tang had even said that he trusted him as a son. Young Fu could not stand his own thoughts another minute. He caught up the two objects he had finished and went toward the coppersmith. The other looked up at his approach, but said nothing. That the master had no intention of easing the way for this youth who stood in embarrassment before him was evident. Young Fu held out the two brasses. I have worked hard to make these as they should be. Will you look at them and tell me what they still lack? The first has the marks of anger on its surface. The second improves. Is that all? Young Fu swallowed his pride. I have been a fool. Truly. Then at the expression on the other's countenance, Tang relented. And you do not think today that you know more about this business than do I? Only today have I realized how stupid I have been. Tang said, You think that you might still learn a few things? The youth nodded miserably, then returned to the anvil for a few days and proved the truth of this. Young Fu obeyed. He was far from happy, but his wretchedness had lessened. He set about the work in a new spirit. 3 days later, Lou was welcomed back to the shop. The tall form had lost its burden of worry. Except for a few added lines about his eyes, Lou appeared much the same as when he was hurried off to the yamen. He lifted a piece of Young Fu's work in amazement. You did not do this, certainly. Old Sue interrupted humorously. Difficult as it is to believe, the countryman is now wedded to this anvil. My position as designer is once more safe, but unless you speedily prove your ability, yours will be gone. Tang added his contribution. A little surprise I kept for your return, Lu. A poor workman turned into a good one. His eyes never left the youth's face. What he saw there seemed to satisfy him, for later he said, When you have finished what you are doing, Young Fu, I have other work for you. When the article in hand was finished and Lu had again paid it a compliment, Young Fu went to Tang. I have an order for a tray, the coppersmith began, something for which the purchaser is willing to pay well. If you have any ideas that are original, work them out and let me see. Tang was still businesslike, but Young Fu recognized this as a return to his old responsibility. It was strange, though, that he had come to think of the anvil with a certain interest. It was at least not the one spot in the place to be avoided. When he submitted the design, Tang examined it carefully. This will do. See that your work on it is of the same quality. Young Fu lost himself happily in the task. At night, he figured what strokes would count for the most in the next day's cutting. He was so engrossed by the subject that one evening Fu Baba spoke to him sharply. Where are your wits? 3 times have I told you that a message came today from my nephew in the hills. My sister-in-law has again been ill. This time she did not recover. Last night she left for the spirit world. Tomorrow at dawn I cross the river. So long as I can help them, I shall remain. The next day he mentioned the matter of his mother's having gone. Why not close the house and stay with me here? Asked the coppersmith when they were alone for a moment. You mean you wish me to sleep and eat with you while my mother is away? Will that be such a hardship that you hesitate about it? Tang's eyes once more held their friendly warmth. Fu Baba stayed in the hill for 10 days. Hills. Each night with evening rice eaten, the 3 apprentices were left to their own amusement. Tang and Young Fu sat late talking of politics, business, of the past years in Chongqing as the older man had known them. Pulling at his water pipe, Tang grew reminiscent. In the past 10 years, even 5, more has happened than in centuries preceding. The Middle Kingdom is in a new cycle of history. Where it will lead is not for me to say. That out of this trouble will come a stable government, there is no doubt. Always before, order has resulted after long periods of banditry and warfare. It will be the same at this time. I, who have 50 years to my credit, may not live so long, but you are young. 18 and 1/2 years, Young Fu said to himself, half to himself. Almost a man. At the youth's rueful reception of this statement, the coppersmith laughed. Few in years did you think I would grant you full maturity? I am most unworthy of such honor, respected coppersmith, but, his eyes sparkled mischievously, in the evenings past you have treated me like a man. Verily, in the hopes that you might grow to fill the title, Tang changed to seriousness. What is your chief wish for the future? Long ago I thought that someday I might like to open a shop of my own. At present I am not sure. Much money would be needed. Moreover, Young Fu colored slightly, I am not unhappy here. Even when you have to take your turn at the anvil? Even then, the anvil I found is not so bad. No task into which a man puts his heart is too bad, said Tang. For the lazy, all work is difficult. The superior man finds pleasure in doing what is uncongenial. A lesson you had to learn. So you are not unhappy in this place, pursued Tang. No, said I'm drawing a blank. Young Fu. No, said Young Fu, there are many reasons. No shop in the province has so fine a reputation. The men are good to work with. He paused as if hunting for words to conclude the summary. And you, his voice faded away. You think I have not been too harsh a master, the older man mused. He went on. Long ago I told you that I trusted you as a son. I did not make that statement without some thought. When you needed punishment, I gave it as a father might have done. It was not entirely without pain to myself. Carefully have I watched you developed. Tang's eyes smiled, sometimes with deep anxiety, an overwhelming pride and a hot temper you have. The second I share with you, the first life-given time will rid you of thoroughly. I have, as you know, no one with blood claims. You have only your mother. If within the next year you continue to prove this manhood you are so anxious to assume, I shall recognize you as my son by the law of adoption. You will not win this without bitterness. I shall begin soon to place on your body some of the responsibility that now burdens my own shoulders, and there will come times when the anvil will seem a pleasant way of spending effort. He rose, put down his pipe, and stretched his arms. Aye, but the hours fly. Tomorrow we shall neither of us do good work. Young Fu stood silent before the other. I have no words. None are needed, was the reply. I'm not so stupid as some may think. He glanced up whimsically. Now go to sleep. This is the last 2 pages of the book. Sleep was the last thing he wished to do. The youth felt at the moment. His pulse was beating so loudly that the apprentices, sound in slumber, might have heard it. As Tang's adopted son, his fortune was made. But that was not the important side of the affair. There was not the slightest doubt in his own mind of the coppersmith's feeling for him. This, a wisdom older than his years had helped him to realize, would do more toward making him mature than any other force in his life. Tang would see, and soon, that he was a man deserving of a man's friendship. Tang's adopted son. He turned the words over and over on his tongue. Why should he alone of all Chungking's youth know such happiness? And only 5 years ago he had stood that first night in Chairmaker's Way and wondered at the marvels of this city. Nothing but good had come to him here. On occasion he had played with folly, and twice at least the city had with a swift change of countenance, threatened to ruin him. But such times had been few. Noiselessly he rose and slipped to the window. Through the barred grating he could see the warm summer moon. Under its rays the rooftops sheltering 1 million Chungkinese had become darkly beautiful. For the present, dinginess and squalor had disappeared, and the Lin and Yangtze had changed their muddy torrents, as if by magic, into streams of molten silver. 2 or 3 hours for this unearthly glamour to linger, and then another dawn would soon sound its clarion for all who labored. Young Fu's heart leapt at the thought. Tomorrow Fu Baba would return to share his good fortune. Tomorrow he would begin to prove himself to Tang. Tomorrow. Aye, but life is good. Life was good. There's a picture, and then they have the glossary of the words. And then there is some notes that I wanted to just read here just a little bit. In Young Fu of the Upper Yangtze, Elizabeth Foreman Lewis writes about life in China during the turbulent period in between the last emperor stepping down from the throne in 1911 to the beginning of a stable nationalist government in 1927. During that time, China had broken into many regions run by powerful warlords or tukuns who fought one another to gain control of the country. The warlords' authority was absolute within their own territory. To fill the ranks of their armies, they ordered the kidnapping of young men, and they forced boys to serve as porters or servants. Soldiers were notorious for their lawless behavior and harsh treatment of the people. As public safety broke down, bandits terrorized the country, and crooks of every kind took advantage of the weak or careless. This was a very dangerous and difficult time to be a boy like Young Fu, trying to live an honest and respectable life. In the notes section, prepare for the 1973 edition of Young Fu. And let me look back here in the front to see what year this was actually written the first time. You can usually look in the front of your book. Okay. So I'm trying to see. The first copy was 1932. Wow, this is an old book, almost 100 years old. And they've made additional copies of the book up through 2007. So that's pretty cool. So for the 1973 edition, Allison R. Lanier remarked that the China of tomorrow will probably be different than it is today. This is truly the case. In the early 1970s, China was still affected by the Cultural Revolution, a massive campaign launched by the communist leadership in 1966 to purge the country of counter-revolutionaries. At that time, young students and workers called Red Guards traveled throughout the country, harassing government officials, teachers, and anyone else they suspected of not being absolutely loyal to China's leader, Chairman Mao Zedong. Mao, I don't remember how to pronounce his last name. I'm going to put that on for you, though, because that's really important. Mao was a legendary, not for good reasons, chairman. Eager to carry out Mao's desire to smash the old country, they destroyed priceless relics and books. Taking control of schools, they harshly criticized teachers as backwards thinkers. They even attacked the police, the military, and one another. The country fell into chaos, forcing Mao to stop the violence by sending the Red Guards to work in the countryside. Until Mao's death in 1976, and that was the year before I was born in 1977, the government maintained strict control over the society. People in the countryside farmed in large agricultural communities, while city workers were assigned jobs in industries, businesses, or schools owned and run by the state. Private ownership of a house or land was not permitted. The government controlled where people lived, when they could marry, and even how many children they could have. Since the early 1980s, however, the situation in China has changed from making revolution to making money. New economic reforms have improved living standards and encouraged private enterprise. Farmers now lease land. Sorry, I'm going to have to get a little drink of water here. Farmers now lease land from the government and sell their crops in open markets, and family members can work in factories or businesses newly opened in the countryside. Higher wages have enabled people to build new homes with running water, electricity, indoor plumbing, and to acquire televisions and other modern conveniences. Changes had even been greater in the cities. New highways and subways carry workers from apartment complexes to downtown skyscrapers, where companies from around the world have opened offices. Formerly drab business districts are now lit with colorful neon signs. New restaurants, cafes, and coffee shops offer a pleasant place to eat or chat with friends. Crowded streets are lined with stores selling everything from expensive Swiss watches to the latest Japanese video games. Luxury hotels, nightclubs, and karaoke bars compete for the business of foreigners and Chinese alike. The average city worker may own a cell phone, DVD player, and computer. Wealthy Chinese might even purchase a suburban home and car, invest in the stock market, fly to remote vacation resorts, and hire others to clean and cook for them. Now, of course, this last copy here that when he's writing this is 2007. So we've had 20 years go by since then. So we know there's still been a ton of changes in China. So this is being written in 2007. However, Young Fu's China in many ways is still alive today. Hardworking, thrifty Chinese are building a modern nation. More opportunities to attend school have opened doors to better jobs. Young people can once again learn a trade and start a business. However, as in the days of Young Fu, serious problems still plague the country. Many people are concerned because the gap between rich and poor is growing, while an alarming number of officials and leading businessmen have become corrupt. Of course, it is a communist country, right? So, also, the fast pace of modernization is harming the environment. The following notes describe some of the major changes that have taken place since the time of Young Fu nearly a century ago. Although life is now much different, people very similar to those in the story can be found in the streets of China today. Okay, and I think I went through this. I talked about transportation early on in chapter 1. There's a whole section on education, the streets, superstitions, foot binding, and I put a video up of foot binding so you're familiar with that. Beggars and bandits, okay? They were a common part of life. When Mao came to power, the situation improved, and there are some gangs and things like that, but corruption is the bigger issue. You know, government officials being corrupt. Sanitation is kind of how they handle, you know, toilet systems and all that sort of thing. So they have a thing on that. They have a thing on floods. The Yellow River often would flood, but they did put in dams and reservoirs in the 1960s and 50s that helped with that. Reverence of age. You know, they have a lot of reverence toward older people, and respect for the elderly is still really important in China. Marriage customs, traditional China, parents would choose that. In the 1950s, the communist government radically changed marriage laws and customs, and young men and women were encouraged to choose their own spouses. And they would still be looking at a good fit over a romantic connection. And then during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 76, married couples were separated sometimes for political reasons. A spouse may be sent to a labor camp to reform political thinking. In China today, most of the strict dating customs and marriage laws have been abandoned. Young people are still looking for a good match, but they are equally interested in finding someone to love. They meet each other in classes, at work, through friends, or even online. Casual dating is becoming more acceptable and common. Young couples in their early 20s can be seen in the city strolling arm in arm on their way to a movie or something like that. They can have very, very basic weddings or big galas. This is an important part that we'll talk about in other sections of this class. In order to slow the growth of China's huge population, in 1979, they had put in the one-child policy. Now, this has changed. This is no longer in effect, but if you talk to people from China, they're still sometimes only having one child because of the cost of having more than one child. In general, city couples are allowed to have only one child, while those in the countryside can have two. To stop families from having more children, the government sometimes forces women to have abortions, or it makes families pay heavy fines. The one-child policy has led to many serious problems. Since Chinese still favor boys over girls, daughters are sometimes abandoned after birth so that the family can try again for a son. Orphanages in China are full of girls. Overall, with far more males than females surviving, the Chinese population is out of balance. As a result, young men in their early 20s are having trouble finding wives. Another pressing social problem is that married children from one-child families discover that they are responsible for taking care of all 4 parents, and perhaps as many as 8 grandparents. So a husband marries a wife, they have to take care of 4 parents, and if their parents are alive, then it could be 8 grandparents, and this is a really heavy burden. This book won a Newbery Medal, and they have the acceptance speech in the back. And that is the end of Young Fu. I really enjoyed that book. I hope you guys did too. I thought it was a very entertaining book.